Gigaheroes by Isaac Young. Chapter 6. Read by Alan Gressov. I woke up in a crowded jail cell with an agonizing headache. There was piss and feces all over the floor. They didn't bother to clean their drunk tanks anymore. Why should they? It would just be a waste of budget. I pushed myself upright against the wall with my feet. I tried to ignore the foul smell as much as I could, even though I was covered in it. I rubbed my face with my hands. I pulled on my cuffs and accidentally snapped them apart. They couldn't even be bothered to give me a pair of decent shackles. I rested my head on the concrete wall. Why had I been so stupid? I had just gotten the water filter, but then I had to go and test my luck. Yeah, threatening the ghost was such a good idea. Now I was under arrest. My chances of shooting it up were now properly ruined. It would be off to a forced labor camp, or worse, enlistment. I swear, if they handed me a gun, I was just going to blow my head off. I thought the fast food joint was rock bottom, but here I was, finding new lows to sink every day. There was some chatter among the more mentally stable side of the cell. These were the criminals and lowlifes who were stupid enough to get caught. The other half was relegated to the muttering schizophrenics and blown-out junkies. At this point, I didn't know which side I belonged to. I think I had a fever. My head was burning up and my mouth was dry. I felt my neck and winced at the wound. I didn't know what the medics did, but I think they took out the broken needle. I hope they did. Either way, everything hurt bad. As I gradually became more alert, my whole body felt sore. It was hard to remember my encounter with the ghost, but I recalled he told me it was some sort of enzyme. If it was so valuable to him, why'd he inject me with it? None of it made any sense. All I could do was wait. It wasn't long before a police officer opened the door to the cell. He locked eyes with me and jammed his thumb toward the hallway. I shambled up and walked over to the officer. "What happened to your cuffs?" the man asked. I shrugged. "They broke." The officer snorted, but he didn't press me on it. He led me down a long hallway made of cheap cinder blocks. The lighting was flickering overhead, and we passed by cells equally ill-maintained. He led me to a room with a lone metal table with 2 chairs on either end. In it was another man, dressed with the wear of a low-grade bureaucrat. This one was balding badly, a slimy weasel of a man who worked his way to the highest position a low priority on the streets could hope for, preying on other low priorities. That's what interrogators were for, putting their boot down on the detestable. "You're charged with trespassing on a crime scene and public intoxication." "How is it public if it was a crime scene?" I asked sardonically. There wasn't any point in disputing the charges. There was no technicality I could use or any appeal beyond the interrogator's whims. The charge may as well have nailed to my chest. Still, I was annoyed that it wasn't even accurate to what I did. Trespass? Sure. Getting high? I had a needle shoved into my neck. I wasn't a junkie, but even I knew you usually shoot heroin in the arm. The small man glared at me. He had a pencil-thin mustache which was really close to his lip. Really pissed me off for some reason. "You have 2 options, Mr. Mason. You can take this to court, as is your right as a citizen of the Democratic Union. If you do so, I will press the maximum charges. Or you can waive that right, and you'll be given a lighter sentence of 8 years hard labor." The options might have been death, and slightly longer death for all the good it did to me. And while I wanted to off myself, neither of those was appealing in the slightest. If I got out of this, I was seriously considering taking the suicide clerk's advice and jumping into the river. "Listen." I slid my chair back so he wouldn't have to smell my soiled clothes. This was all a big misunderstanding. Can't you cut a guy a break here? I don't have any money. I just lost the place I lived. I don't have anything. Please, I'm begging you. Let me walk out of those doors and I won't bother anyone again. I swear. I really pleaded with the man. I'm not one to grovel, but if he asked me to get on my hands and knees, I would have done so in a heartbeat. I just needed a break. Just one measly break in this miserable life of mine. This is all your fault. You shouldn't have been trespassing. You can whine about that all you want. He didn't even bother hiding the snark from his voice. He reached into his briefcase and brought out a single sheet of paper. Now, I need you to sign this confessing that you are indeed guilty, and you can start serving your 8 years. Oh, come on! I yelled at him. 8 years? For what? Getting high on your crime scene, which happened to be my home? I didn't have anywhere else to go. Did you want me to freeze out in the street? The look he gave me told me yes. I had done the unthinkable crime of making his life a little more tedious, and he behind his bored expression, I could tell, was privately grinning from ear to ear. This wasn't just a man who did what he did to survive. He took pleasure in putting people down. Maybe that was the only type of person who could do this sordid job. You don't have to do this. I'll do anything. Anything. The interrogator clicked a pen and tapped the document. Make this difficult, and I'll bump it up. Please. 10 years it is. Just hold on. 12. Let me just say 15. For fuck's sake! I slammed my hands on the table. Shut up! Just shut up! The interrogator fell backwards in his chair to the floor. He scrambled back with an abject look of terror on his face. I was confused, and I looked down. The sturdy metal table now had 2 very large dents in it. I held up my hands in front of me as if they had become magic. Dazedly, I reached for the cuffs on my wrist. I peeled them off as if they were paper. I was standing there shell-shocked when I registered that the interrogator was screaming into his radio. We have an abnormal! There's an abnormal in this room! Get back up! Get back up in here fucking now! Still dazed, I walked over to the interrogator and swiped his radio away. I crushed it with my bare hand, letting the scrap fall to the ground. I had superpowers. Ah. It's honestly like becoming a kid again. I remember on the playground we'd all pretend that we could fly or lift heavy objects or shapeshift, and when you grow up you realize you can't do those things. You'll never be able to do those things. And while other people lead amazing lives, you got the short end of the stick. You lead a miserable life in a miserable world surrounded by people equally miserable to you. And all the while, you look up in the sky, seeing other people doing the things you can only fantasize about in your wildest dreams. A switch went off in my head. I can't remember the last time I was giddy about anything, but I giggled in that interrogation room. I cackled maniacally and laughed and laughed and laughed. I'm sure I frightened the interrogator to death, seeing the homeless man develop super strength and then chuckling like a madman. Well, he could stay scared. I could kill with my bare hands. A police officer burst through the door and shot me. He shot me square in the chest 3 times. I barely felt it. Glancing down, I reached up to my soaked shirt and peeled the bullets off my skin one by one. They didn't even leave welts. It took me another moment to come to my senses of the situation. I looked at the officer very seriously. Now, I know you're just doing your job, and that's why I don't mind that you just tried to put 3 holes in me. But I'm going to tell you right now, If you try to shoot me again, I will rip your arms off." The officer shakily dropped his pistol and ran hollering down the hall. I knew that I had a very short time frame to take advantage of the chaos. I walked over to the interrogator, who was huddling over in a corner, praying to whatever god he knew. I knelt over him, grinning. "Give me one reason why I should let you live." "Please!" I ran my arm through his chest. He gasped and sputtered and moaned. And then he was dead. I'm not going to lie, that felt good. Even so, I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eye when I killed him. I'm not a killer. Well, I'm not someone who enjoys killing. I stood up, blood dripping down my arm. That was when 3 more men with riot gear appeared in the room. I suppose that was all the armor they could find in a short notice. All of them had rifles, and all 3 pointed directly at me. Now, I didn't go from homeless guy to the rage murder machine in an instant. At that point, I snapped back to myself. I threw up my hands, just wanting to talk this out, but between the fact that I was standing over the corpse of their interrogator and that my right arm was dripping red with blood, I guess they thought the better solution was to unload on me. For a brief second, I was absolutely terrified. I braced myself, waiting for the bullets to cut through me like butter. My heart seized in my chest, and I waited to fall over dead. Instead, I remained standing there, completely unhurt. I looked up, equally surprised as the 3 men. I still hadn't gotten used to being bulletproof yet. Even though they had treated me rather poorly, I honestly didn't feel like killing anyone else today. My head was still aching, and I really wanted some water. I wandered past the terrified men without giving them a second glance. Meandering down the hallway, I passed by the cells. Ripping the bars off, those cognizant went running every which way. The alarms were blaring in the halls now. Or maybe they had been all along. I don't know. I entered a different part of the precinct. The floors turned to tile and the whole area generally became a lot nicer. I entered a room full of cubicles. Some people were still rushing about. They all dropped everything and turned tail once they saw me. I didn't even look their way. My eyes were locked on the water fountain in the corner. It was some nasty tap water, just what you would expect from a poorly funded department. But man, it was still the best drink of my life. That water tasted like freedom, and I gulped it down. Several men entered and began shooting at me. I continued lapping down the water for several more seconds as I vaguely felt bullets hitting me. I finished and I straightened up. Resting my head back, I groaned in relief. My headache faded a little and everything just felt better. Looking forward to the men who were busy reloading, I wiped the water off with my arm. "Run," I ordered them. They all looked up in absolute horror. "Run!" I yelled at the top of my lungs. They all booked it, leaving me in the empty office room. I glanced around, thinking about what to do next. I shrugged my shoulders. I was going to have a little fun before I left. I went up to the nearest office chair and gently kicked it. The seat went flying up into the ceiling, where it crashed into a light with a shower of sparks and glass. Dust and debris rained down, and the broken remains of the chair fell to the floor. Giggling again, I picked up a computer monitor and chucked it at the wall a little harder. The monitor punched a hole in the wall, exploding into 1,000 tiny pieces into the next room. I began wrecking that office like a kid playing with his toys in a sandbox. The world had now become my very own playpen, where I could do whatever I liked. I ripped the water fountain off the wall and splashed myself with water from the busted pipe. I punched my arm through the wall multiple times, each one feeling more cathartic than the last. I stomped my foot and created a crater in the floor. Even then, I was holding back most of my newfound strength. I felt that I could rip apart this very building if I wanted to. Nothing could touch me. I was invincible. And as I was looking around at the destruction I caused, my eyes went wide as I suddenly realized who was likely on their way right now. As much as I felt I could take on the world, the real guns would be rolling in soon. I had to make my escape and make it fast. I barreled out of the office room and ran as fast as I could for the nearest exit. I went so fast that I couldn't turn, and I slammed through the wall. Again, I hardly felt anything as I accidentally kept going, wall after wall. I decided to run a little faster. Dust and debris coated me, but I didn't care. Why should I have to listen to hallways? I didn't have to obey any of their rules anymore. Finally, I saw a room with a window and threw myself through the brickwork. Except it was only a little too late for me to realize I was on the 4th story. I threw my arms up as I braced for the fall. But I didn't. I hung in the air as the dust was swept away by the wind. Below me was the street where people were screaming and running. It was chaos. A few of them saw me and pointed at the person hanging there in the sky. I saw a few more raise their phones to take videos of me. I didn't care. I laughed as I tried flying. It came as naturally to me as walking. It was like I had been born with this. I did a somersault in the air. I flew around from building to building, going faster or slower. It took several more minutes for sense to kick in again, and I bolted in the air. I thought about landing, but I was still covered in dust and blood. It wouldn't be hard to pick me out of a crowd. Maybe it was time for that dip in the East River after all. I pivoted towards the river and rocketed towards it. Getting more confident, I tried going faster and faster. The city turned into a blur before me. I saw the frozen river and plunged towards it. I knew the water was nasty and disgusting, but I was used to that. I shot through the ice. The water parted before me like it was nothing, and despite the murk, I could actually see the riverbed quite clearly. And yes, it was as nasty as you would think. I realized to my delight that I didn't feel the need to breathe. I didn't know how long I could hold my breath. Maybe I would try it later, but now didn't feel the appropriate time. I traveled downriver for a few miles before punching out of the ice and landing on the bank. Resting on the gravel, it seemed I had lost the attention of the masses for now. I decided to lie low for a few hours and rest up. And after that, well, after that, the city was mine.